Welcome to Breaking Down Barriers for People with Lived Experience, Reflections from Making the Shift Scholars with Lived Experience of Youth Homelessness Network. My name is Star Gale. I am the coordinator for the LivEx network, and I will be your narrator. Let's start with some context and history to better understand MTS and LivEx. MTS is a youth homelessness social innovation lab created to transform responses to youth homelessness through research and knowledge mobilization focused on prevention and housing stabilization. It's co led by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness at York University and Away Home Canada. It began in 2017 with a community research project funded by Government of Canada's Youth Employment Skills Strategy. This project continues today as MTS's demonstration lab. In 2019, supported by York University, Dr. Stephen Gates and Melanie Redman navigated the application and incorporation of MTS as an NCE. This year, the UN Economic Commission for Europe established the Toronto Centre of Excellence on Youth Homelessness Prevention at York, co-led again by the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness, Away Home Canada, and MTS, creating a global platform to learn, share, and mobilize knowledge about youth homelessness prevention. MTS has four key initiatives: funding innovative research, prototyping promising programs, mobilizing research knowledge, building capacity in the sector. Two core research themes: shifting to prevention through early intervention, sustaining successful exits from homelessness, and three cross-cutting research themes: enabling health, well-being, and inclusion, enhancing outcomes for Indigenous youth, and leveraging data and technology. MTS Scholars with Lived Experience of Youth Homelessness, LivEx, is a network by and for scholars with lived experience of youth homelessness. It offers supports in the areas of mentorship, training, and peer-to-peer learning, furthering LivEx growth and leadership in academics and research. In 2018-2019, LivEx had advisory roles within MTS as the network developed, holding seats on the MTS board, research and implementation management committees. LivEx also developed autonomous governance with a steering and advisory committee. The past 2 years, supported by MTS, LivEx secured a 5-year funding investment from KPMG, maintained their board and advisory seats, with scholars also participating in the MTS forums, HQP development, and MTS funded research. LivEx also developed my position, a coordinator role for someone with lived experience of youth homelessness, like myself, and launched the Scholars with Lived Experience of Youth Homelessness bursary. We will now hear from LivEx scholars about what helped and hindered the development of the network within the context and with the support of MTS. What helped and hindered their LivEx-led knowledge mobilization in academics and research, and close with what helped or hindered the development of LivEx support networks.
People who are engaged in university work, who are researchers, who are students, or otherwise engaged in academia or community-based research. Charlotte and I actually met during our consultations with the National Centers of Excellence proposal for making this shift, as people with lived experience of youth homelessness who were weighing in on what this network might look like if it got funded and how lived experience might be integrated into the fabric of their governance structure and decision making.
It really helps to be in contact with a group of peers who have similar experiences to you, not only because of the support you can get from those peers in terms of helping with your studying, learning about administrative processes that you otherwise you would have had to navigate alone, but also in terms of normalizing and making visible the reality that there are lots of people in post-secondary education who have experienced homelessness or who are living through homelessness right now. So just knowing that those people are there and having an avenue to connect with them is really beneficial in a lot of ways.
The first time Charlotte and I got to engage with the broader kind of what would become the network was in 2019, I think, where we were actually able before COVID to get together in person with a variety of folks from around Canada, really, who had seen us advertise it and said, I have lived experience of youth homelessness. I am a scholar and I want to connect with other people. And we were able to get together in person for 2 days. The first day kind of just being a brainstorming session of we were where Charlotte and I were able to share, as people with lived experience, this is what we thought the network might be able to do to create peer supports, to create professional opportunities, to create mentorship. What would you like to see? And so we got to get together over a day to share our experiences and also share our desires for what the network might look like. In terms of visibility, that was a huge one. I know members of the network came up to us even before the network really existed and said, you're a student who's talking about your lived experience and talking about how that actually positions you well to do research, but also is really difficult. And I saw this in myself, and then I felt comfortable sharing my lived experiences as well in ways that helped me connect with people. COVID happened, and all of a sudden with people that I didn't know that well, but had these connections to through the lived experience network, they became like a lifeline. I was going out and doing frontline stuff. People were doing research stuff. People were doing peer supports, and because there was a need for it, we had to get together and find these spaces to debrief and think of how you can do research when you are in communities that are being impacted by something that is aggravated like COVID, and also attending to the fact that this has been happening in our communities for a really long time. So COVID was one way where I saw how important having this network of peers was for me, and having it in relation to academia, where a lot of people seemed really impacted by COVID, but weren't in the same way that I think a lot of the people in the network were. And so I think it became a really precious space where we could vent and grieve and talk, and that we need those spaces that are by and for us in order to really support one another.
Working with people from making the shift and having that understanding amongst us that it's okay to feel awkward and uncomfortable, or rather that it's okay to make them feel awkward and uncomfortable, because even with the best of intentions, when you're engaging with people, you just have to be aware that you have to be open to feedback. And I think that's been one great benefit of making the shift, is that we have had the opportunity to continuously give our feedback and continuously have that responded to. So there is a flexible process. It's never fixed. It was never going to be, this is how the network is, and it has to stay like that. It's always evolving, and it's continuously changing to meet our needs as we become aware of them.
Within structures and institutions where people are starting to think of inclusivity of lived experience, historically, people who have experienced homelessness do not have any access to those spaces. So the imagination of what that can look like is still really limited. And so what I've seen in many instances is that the idea is that lived experience are experts, and they can come in and imagine whatever they want. And so we will, and we'll say, this is what we want. We want something that's radically different. We want something that's going to affect massive change. We're going to imagine all of these radically different futures because we have to, and we have for much of our lives. And then when we bring them into these institutional settings, it's we're usually hitting up against walls where it's not possible because of this, or funding doesn't allow for that, without a clear idea of what those parameters are, of what is possible within these spaces and what isn't, or how we might have to push in order to make things possible that aren't right now. It's really difficult for lived experience to lead initiatives that they are being told that they should be leading. And so one thing that we've been talking about from the beginning is that anytime something happens, that there's at least two of us, because Charlotte and I have seen, we can message each other and say, was that weird? Do you understand what's going on? And I think that that's been really helpful in trying to create actual connections, so people have that support no matter where they sit within an organization.
We as LivEx scholars decided to create safe spaces for sharing our personal, professional, and academic highlights and challenges. And it was in these spaces that we really grew as a network in our early days. We saw how our shared experiences brought us together, and we recognized the importance of keeping this network strong. At one of the peer chats, we had a really emotional conversation about our shared grief and the loss due to the homelessness and overdose crises. And at the end of the conversation, I was asked by MTS leadership if I would be interviewed by them. Upon reflection on this conversation and interview request, I realized that we can't recreate a private and personal sharing of stories, especially through an interview with a non-LivEx person. But I also realized that we had something here because it was our shared experience that made this such a powerful conversation. Not only did we have urgently necessary stories to tell about our lived experience, but we also, and possibly more importantly, had stories to tell about our experiences as researchers, professionals, volunteers, and advocates trying to navigate this work with experience that set us apart from many people in the field.
This podcast meets the need for expanded and non-traditional forms of knowledge mobilization. And this is really important to us because it represents a deep valuing of the knowledge and experience held by our community. This is a project that is not just deeply important to us, but it's also a valuable tool for learning about the shifting and growing nature of lived experience-led projects. We offer this podcast and our work on it as an example because we know that there are others out there who are beginning their own projects that are similar to this. And we want to increase the knowledge about the process of meaningfully and completely uplifting lived experience work. This represents a break with the past, and learning how to make it work is definitely challenging, but ultimately rewarding. And so our rationale for the project has always been to produce a narrative-based podcast by and for people with lived experience in its conception and its leadership.
Making the Shift was instrumental in helping us to mobilize our idea. The spaces were a place to meet, write, connect, and support each other, and also to imagine our future as a network. Through the podcast, we are furthering this idea of building a platform to share our work by providing a space for guests of the podcast, who are LivEx members, to shape and develop their own narrative to ensure that their voice is heard and they are comfortable with the product we produce.
Our aim has always been to provide support and flexibility for those we work with, and we've also found that support and flexibility in working with MTS. One of the most impactful aspects of working with MTS has been when those involved sat us down and laid all the cards on the table, because honest and transparent dialogue is vital, even in the face of adversity or bad news.
We have now created spaces where Making the Shift is not present. And this was a valuable and important lesson because these spaces of just lived experience people are essential for us to strategize and grow in a by us and for us fashion.
Learning about homelessness has traditionally been done at the expense of marginalized communities or on our backs, and we need to have ownership over our narratives. But the resources to make this work don't always exist while working within inequitable societal power structures.
MTS is trying really hard to make the podcast work. They originally said yes, and were really excited about the possibilities for this idea. Our question was, how can we move forward and still own our narratives? We were eventually able to sit at the table with the MTS leadership and lawyers and try to come up with a plan. The intellectual property situation that we came across is something that we did not know would be so complicated, and either did Making the Shift. The fact that MTS is a not-for-profit and LivEx is part of MTS, so not its own entity, makes knowing who owns the intellectual property difficult, and it is somewhat unprecedented, which is why it's such important work. The meaning of the intellectual property is different for us as people who have had our stories told, stolen, or silenced in so many spaces. We are hopefully breaking a path for others who will come after us. And although MTS is trying to make this work for both them and us, the power differential existed, and we had no way of changing that.
I mentioned honest and transparent communication, and this has been an unfolding journey. We are sometimes put in a position in which we have to justify or prove ourselves as professionals who need to be fully briefed with available information. A large part of self-advocacy is the constant battle to make sure we are heard and valued. We have to explain why the things we're asking for are so important and why we're pushing so hard for the podcast to exist in the way that we've envisioned and in the way that we have discussed with the people who are involved.
over 20 years, I've been doing work on in different cities around Canada and the United States, looking at tiny homes and looking at issues related to homelessness, housing, and policy, especially surrounding addictions and mental health, and the relationship between different types of housing and the ability of housing to help people overcome health and other types of disabilities. Especially in my experience, once people have stable housing, they have an ability to concentrate on other issues if they wish, like mental health and addictions especially. So to me, housing is healthcare. So I've been doing this research for a very long time, and I recently was hired on a tenure track position, actually shortly after joining LivEx. I'm a little bit older than most of the people. I'm a lot older than most of the people in LivEx, but they're a really amazing group of talented and really smart people who just aren't afraid to share their experience, strength, and hope. And so they gave me an opportunity to talk about my experience. And actually, they gave me a lot of confidence about who I am. And I used to think of my lived experience as a weakness, but in fact, they gave me a very strong sense that, I didn't really know that I had been sort of like an indirect mentor for them. And some people, when I first met them, said that to me. They said, "Oh, you're like, this is great. You're like, I love your work." I had no idea that people were actually reading my work. A lot of the work we're doing now, especially with post-secondary student research, is collaborative, it's network-based, it's students working with students and students building capacity with each other. So it's really, it's not, I wouldn't say heartwarming, but it's, maybe I would say it's heartwarming to see students working together, not fearing each other, and especially the students are seeing each other now as mutual supports rather than competitors. Everybody has worries today, but to be a student right now is a difficult thing to navigate. I mean, it really is different than when I went to school in the 80s. Things were far more optimistic, and there was a lot less anxiety associated with the experience. So I'm able to sort of carry, I like when I'm not able to show up for all the meetings, but when I do, I always have some new lens for sharing with my students. The academic community has been looking for something to breathe life into a lot of the social sciences. They've been looking for a vehicle to sort of, I'll say translate. So to gather information and then to analyze it really collaboratively, and then to translate it so that it's really far reaching. And that's what LivEx is really, but everybody in LivEx is doing that kind of work.
What it supported me the most with was academics. My friend Charlotte Smith is a part of this network, has really helped me understand a lot about writing proposals and book reports and essays and all the fun structured writing that you can do in university. More than that, she's also someone with lived experience of homelessness. And I thought that was really neat because I don't connect with many people that are in the academic category when it comes to homelessness. I mean, a lot of people that I hung around with were not for healthy reasons, and then having this sort of change in culture was really interesting to me because it was someone that was also not changing their life around, but moving forward with it in a healthy way. I thought that's really important to me, and it led me to understand that I'm not the only one, and that I could have someone that I could really trust and talk to. And I guess that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And to me, I guess I'm just thankful to be a part of this network. And I feel like I found a sense of belonging in it.
Hey, Professor Solano, I wanted to share this piece with you. I'm just lost in my head a lot. It's called Crashing. It's crashing. I'm crashing. Why? Friends, suicidal thoughts, addiction. So what does this make of me? Some say they're only human. I feel like I cannot be free. I've been like aluminum. Influence embodies my environment. Homelessness surrounds my identity. I'm debating on retirement into an eternity with illuminati. I've had so many friends throughout the years. Many dead, most lost. Reality came to my fears, and now I see the cost. Suicidal thoughts plague me on the daily. My mind is held hostage and dismantled. As proof quite plainly, I'm lost and shackled. Leaves me with a sense of anger and loss. I'm sorry for my disappearance, but I couldn't hold on to a false ideology as a cross. I can't help but wonder if this is the right decision. Instead of clinging on the past, look towards thoughtful revision. As contemplate a healthier, broader scope, recognize a need for hope. I can't help but wonder what life would have been like. That's a trail I cannot know. I feel dysfunctional with my psyche because of the challenges I'm forced to undergo. The process of natural development has created new heights. I was beaten to be fearful and hesitant, but instead, what I did was garner new insight. I can't help but notice I'm crashing. I practice various forms of coping. No matter the form, I end up collapsing from silent days of hoping. I'm lost in my cynical young mind, a product of my environment, strongly connected to powder. It supports the idea that I'm confined, finances, housing, religion, socio-political power. Social class, race, ethnicity, the color of skin, were viewed as inhumane, something else altogether. I am shattered glass, a dying face, demonic sin. Within this public domain that will last forever, I am not kin. Thank you.
When it comes to the LivEx Scholars Network, the support that I get there doesn't match anywhere else. I know that if I am doing something, if I'm reading an article that makes me want to pick it up and throw it across the room, that I can go to our groups and I can put a message out there and I can have a conversation with people that are going to understand, which gives me a space that allows me to be authentic. And it also validates the rage that I have towards the oppression that everyone that I love has faced, the things that I watch on a daily basis, everything that all of us have been through. The fact that we've all had to go through it is bad enough. So if we have a space where we can come together and we don't have to explain it or justify it and no one's going to demean our experiences, then it just gives you a space where the rest of the world falls away. Is the fact that they've supported us and provided us with opportunities to come to tables and have our voices heard and to recognize the fact that we have value in our experiences, and not just for our experiences, but also for our academic qualifications and any other life experience that we bring to the table as well. I myself was a social worker for 12 years frontline in my community after being a street involved youth in the 90s. So my experience goes beyond academic and street involvement. I've got service delivery involvement as well. We live in an uncomfortable space all the time. And when we come to your table, it's uncomfortable for us. And there's a need for you to come to our spaces and be uncomfortable with us there so that we can do that hard work together and make a really meaningful connection so that we can get meaningful engagements on both sides of this so that we can walk out to the other side and all of us will know that we're working towards the same thing with the same goals.
What hindered me with the LivEx network was I was at a lot of loss of what we could do. I didn't really understand what the network was about. Differences in time schedules and COVID happened, and it was difficult to have a foundation. However, over time, it developed into something that I'm really proud of.
And that brings us to the end of our presentation. Many thanks to the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, Making the Shift Scholars with Lived Experience of Youth Homelessness Network.